What's up, people? David Feldman-Makrias here again, and we're going to show you today what the most important variable is in analyzing literally any marketing report, any advertising report, the one thing you have to pay attention to, the one thing that should be, if it's not already, in every advertising or marketing report. And honestly, this could be in a lot of other reports as well, beyond advertising and marketing. Once you understand the principles of how to use this variable to correctly analyze data, you will unlock more potential within your business, within your analytics, within all the opportunities that are available to you within the data set. So without further ado, let's talk about it. So what is it? What is this most variable? What was I going to say? Most valuable variable that we can use to analyze data? Well, it's your date range. It's your date range. So some of you may be going, what are you talking about, David? That's not very valuable. That's not very variable. That's not very valuable. I know what my date range is. Why is that so valuable? Well, let me explain. So right now I'm looking at Google Analytics 4, right? For a client. User acquisition report. I typically like to start there if I'm looking at specific instances of traffic. And right now I have a date range of November 1 to November 10 versus October 1 to October 10. So your date range is super, super valuable because it paints the story and the paradigm of what we're looking at. We can make a lot of different arguments on what date range to use and when. And I'm going to give you some of those items on how I use date ranges to compare data. And I'm going to do that by going through some examples. Congratulations, it's the date range. That's the most important variable when analyzing your advertising or anything else, typically. So it's time, because we all have that constant, right? But there's different windows to look at different time. And we have to be careful on what each window tells us, because we could be taking a specific date range of data and making a vast conclusion on that date range of data, when in fact, that's not necessarily the right date range to look at. So what is my default? Principles of date ranges. Let's go with the default. So default date range, mine, some people may think a month to date is good. So I typically don't like month to date, but let me define why I don't like month to date and what I use instead, but sort of how you can apply a specific default date range for whatever you're looking at. So most of the clients that I have, pretty much all of them do business in monthly increments. Okay. So we compare chunks of data in months. And then those can be summed up in quarters, and those can be summed up in annual reports. And that's basically how most businesses operate. So a month is a pretty standard practice. So especially within car business, right? Car business, it's always based on months. What's our sales figures for the month? What's our projected, revenue for the month, or projected units for the month? And I've used that date range to go with other business too, like e-commerce. How much are we planning to sell this month? If it's a holiday month, if it's a slower month, whatever it is, the month is usually how we prescribe things. And we do that too because I bill monthly, right? The agency bills monthly. And then we also have reporting that's monthly, and we usually have meetings around the month. So it makes sense that we're looking at a month's performance. A month makes sense because it's not too little of time where you can't see enough data, but it's not too long of time where things have gone on too long and you can't make a switch or a change. So let's say a monthly increment is my main increment. You have to define what your main increment is. So monthly increment is the main increment, right? So now, types of date ranges. My favorite is month to date, but wait, through yesterday. Okay, so as an example, today is December 11th. So then my date range is 12/1/23 through 12/10/23. I like to use month to date through yesterday. Why? Because if I do a month to date today, business is not done today. I usually do stuff right in the middle of the day or when business just starts and things like that. When you're looking at leads and you're looking at sales and you're looking at revenue. And I don't understand why interfaces don't have an MTD through yesterday. It baffles me. I don't really want month to date because today is not over. And when you do comparisons versus the previous month or the previous year or whatever you're doing, then you're not comparing apples to apples, right? You want to compare apples to apples as much as possible. So again, I don't understand why nobody has that as a default. I think they should because I mean, here, look, when I do this, it's like, okay, we have last 7, last 28, last 30, last 90, last 12, last calendar, this year, today, yesterday, this week, last week. Who cares? Tell me month to date through yesterday. Okay. So I typically like that one. It gives me the most accurate results. So now you can dispute me. You could say conversion lag. You could say a bunch of other stuff, but that's usually my default and what I stick to. I also do. You can also do a month to date if you want. You could do this week. You could do a last 30 days. 30 days. Last 90 days. What I typically use, I'll use a last 30 if I need to just get a quick glimpse on stuff. I typically don't use a month to date. I don't use it this week. I'll use the last 90 if I just want to see a quick glance of stuff. So honestly, other date ranges that I rarely use. Last quarter, unless I'm doing a big compiling report, but honestly, the last 90 days is last quarter. So I'm going to take that out. Yesterday, today, what else? Last week. Like, I don't look at any of that stuff. It doesn't make sense with the business, right? Typically. And it might make sense with your application and your business, but sometimes, you have to line it up to where your business falls. Maybe you do want to look at last week, but is last week enough time? See, that's the other thing. I typically like to have multiple date ranges that I look at any given time. And I like to compare them all so we can see how we're pacing. So a typical report and what I do, let's say typical report. You know what? Principles of date ranges. Let's do comparisons. How do comparisons work? Very simple. I typically compare a previous month date range versus previous month, or sometimes in the interface it's called previous period. I'll also do a date range versus, actually it's really previous month to date through yesterday, and then date range is previous year through yesterday. Previous MTD, previous year MTD through yesterday. That's typically what I use. I like to have those two comparisons on all the time. I wish I could have multiple analytics windows and overlay them on top of each other, but there'd be way too many lines. I like to do that because I want to see how we did last month to make sure we're pacing okay, but also certain businesses have certain cyclical trends at certain times of the year. So I like to look at last year's performance as well. When you look at these two, it's going to give you a nice projection about, okay, where am I at? Where am I sitting? Am I pacing correctly? It can give you a lot of insight. Like, is the market different? Is my demand different? And then you start asking all these different questions, right? So that's typically what I like to do. Let's give an example then. Let's go back to our GA4. So I'm actually in the previous month. So what I'm going to do, and GA4 is really funny with their date range. So I'm going to click here, 1st through the 10th I have my little comparison toggle. I'm not doing any of these default ones. I'm doing a custom one. So then I'm going to do 1st through the 10th. Apply. And that's it. I usually have stuff broken out by source medium because that's just what I'm accustomed to looking at. And I think it gives a nice, more accurate view because there's multiple instances of Google usually. Google Ads and Google Organic breaks it out nicely for me. So you could also look at it via channels, but this isn't a GA4 reporting. This is only about the date range. Now, I'm going to look, oh, wow, okay, we're pretty much even with users. I usually look left. I look all the way on the left, glance, scroll all the way to the right, glance, see what we're doing. So this is my top of funnel. This is my bottom of funnel. Looks like our bottom of funnel is off on some conversions. Top of funnel is pretty much there with new users. So in these first 10 days, whatever reason, people aren't converting as much. Okay, I know that now, right? But here's the deal. Is this enough data? Is 10 days enough data? That's the second question I ask. Let's actually make a thing called questions to ask. Am I comparing apples to apples? Am I looking at enough data? Example, 10 days may not be enough. How do you know when 10 days is enough data? What I typically like to see or say, especially in the world of Google, there's an inclination that, oh, you need to leave campaigns alone for 3 months. No, you don't. That's not right. But if someone says, oh, yeah, I'm going to launch your campaign, you should see results in 2 days. No, that's not true either. There's no real, how do I say? There's no real definitive answer. My default is when we make a change in an account or we make a change to advertising, we should see trends, positive trends. Typically, in most cases, it's not every case. I'm sure a lot of you can prove me wrong, but in most cases, we should see positive trends in the first 10 to 14 days. We should see positive trends in 10 to 14 days. I'm going to say questions to ask, things to remember. We should see positive trends, or I shouldn't even say positive trends. We should see trends happen after a change within the first 10 to 14 days. This typically is not enough time for campaigns or advertising strategies to fully take effect. However, it is enough time to have your first analysis. And typically, I mean, this makes sense to clients too. It's like, okay, we're going to revisit this in 10 to 14 days and we're going to have a check-in, right? We're going to have a check-in. What's the check-in going to be? Well, the check-in's going to be, is the thing happening that we wanted to happen? Is the thing not happening that we wanted to happen? Or is nothing happening, right? So it doesn't mean you should make a change. Typically, what I would do at that point is list a bunch of scenarios of what we could do in our hypothesis. But that's typically what I do in best practice. And it works pretty well. And it's consistent and you can apply it through anything. So why am I talking about that when we're talking about date ranges? Well, it's really, really important because if you have a default date range that you go to and then you lead whoever you're talking about or you lead yourself with your business in that right perspective, then you will be a lot more confident and you can have a little more reassurance and rest assured that, okay, this is going to take time, but I know I'm going to look at it then. Again, if-then statements, right? If-then statements. Or else. Okay, so questions to ask. Am I comparing apples to apples? Am I looking at enough data? I would say in most cases, 10 days is not enough data, but it gives us a trend. Now, if it's December 1st through the 3rd, it really doesn't matter, right? It's too close. So typically what I like to see is at least 3 weeks of data, because then it's a little more like we can work with it. It means something. There's examples, there's trends. So that's pretty much it. Now, what am I looking at? Why is it? Oh, that's if I was going to select. See, this is weird. Google's weird sometimes. Okay. That just glitched out on me, didn't it? I came down here. Look at that. 13th to December 10th, October 16th, and November 12th. Like, that's not consistent with this, but then I just scroll up, and then it's fine. Weird. Okay, so then what I'll do is I'll look at same period last year. That actually is a nice default. Gives me the same period last year. See where we're at. Things didn't really change. We had a lot more new users, interestingly enough. We weren't recording conversions and events. So see how I just quickly look at that? What's my user count? I don't really look at stuff in the middle yet. And then what's this? I look at the two ends because I want to see, okay, how much top of funnel traffic am I getting? I need a certain amount to get there, but how many conversions am I actually getting to? What's happening with all the things that matter, right? So, date ranges. So in conclusion, the date range is your most important variable because if I go back here and let's say I'm 10 days worth of data, but then I change it to 90 days, there could be some things in here that paint a very different picture than what I need to know. So if I just do some normal comparisons, here, you got to compare apples to apples. This didn't click over correctly, but look, you got 12,000 new users compared to 1,200. Why? Because I'm looking at 90 days versus 10 days. That's just a brief example. So let's compare previous period. Let's do preceding period. And I want to do last 90. Let's make sure it's all clicked. So now this instance actually shows something very different. It shows our new users are down in this instance by 21%. What is going on there? So we have new users down by 21%. Well, that's a lot different than when I looked previously, right? So if you look this and do an annual report here, it's like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Why is all this happening? Oh my gosh, we have a lot of new users down. But could be a sign of the market, could be a sign of duplicate tracking, could be a sign of a lot of different things. That's why it's important to look at multiple date ranges at once. Okay, let's do a last 30, which I don't usually like to use, but we're going to do it in this instance anyways. Last 30 only shows 3%, right? So we're better in the last 30 days than we were in the last 90 days. So it's like, okay, what's going on here? That's why the different date ranges are important. And it's really, really important to look at month to date through yesterday. Because especially if your business is cyclical, look at it, compare those, and compare it to the previous year, and you should be in a good situation. Comparisons, make sure you're comparing the previous period correctly. You don't want to compare 3 months of data to 10 days of data. You're going to paint a very different story. I always use month to date through yesterday is my default. Make sure you're comparing apples to apples and make sure you're looking at enough data. And if you aren't looking at enough data, that's okay. Just be aware of it. So that first 10 days to 14 days, you want to see some trends, but also understand I can't make a decision off this data. I can just look and see what's going on. And then maybe start to formulate, okay, if it goes this way, I'm going to do this. If it goes that way, I'm going to do this. Hopefully this helps, guys. Like, comment, subscribe, please. I'll keep putting more stuff like this out there, and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you so much.